show where knowing your GDP from your CPI could let you win. Before we start, let's set the stage by taking a look into the economy in 60 seconds.
Starting off with unemployment, the U.S. unemployment rate is 4.2%, just above the national rate, 4.21%. In New York, it is slightly higher at 4.4%. Most people are working, but there's still a little slack in the labor markets. In payroll, we've got 132.8 million non-farm jobs, which is a strong labor market indicator.
Inflation. Consumer prices are rising at 2.75%, and while that's down from last year's peak, it's still above the Federal Reserve's 2% target. Breaking it down, core CPI, which excludes food and energy prices, stands at 123.5, while the headline CPI is at 3.87, thanks to energy prices holding steady at 177.
Next up is the GDP. The economy is growing steady with a real GDP of $23.37 trillion. The next part is interest rates. The interest on reserve balances is 4.65%, and the discount rate is slightly higher at 4.75%. These rates keep the economy balanced.
Consumer sentiment is at 70.5 out of 100. Meanwhile, inflation expectations for the future are steady: 2.26% for 5 years, 2.32% for 10 years, and 2.44% for 30 years. And don't forget the money supply. M2 is at a whopping $21.39 trillion.
Adding on, the wages are currently at $35.61 per hour. The housing price index is 688.42. Durable goods is at $286,561 million. And stock index has NASDAQ at 19,621.68. S&P index has it at 5,942.47.
Now let's meet our teams. There we have the economists and the feds. All right, let's dive into the first round. Get ready to test your knowledge. We surveyed 100 economists for these answers. Let's play the Federal Reserve feud. Okay, our first category is economic indicators. We surveyed 100 economists to name an economic indicator people talk about all the time. Let's see who can name the top 4 answers.
Inflation!
Go. Survey says inflation. That's number 1 answer. Contestant 1, can you explain?
Sure. Inflation is currently at 2.75%, which means prices are rising, but not so much that we're panicking.
Economists, do you want to pass or play?
Play!
All right, back to the economists. Name a commonly discussed economic indicator.
Unemployment.
Good answer! Good answer!
Unemployment. Right again. Contestant 2, can you explain?
Of course. The current unemployment rate in the U.S. is 4.2%, while in New York it is slightly higher at 4.4%. That is still close to the NAIRU, or the national rate of unemployment, which is 4.21%.
Great job. Let's see if you can guess the next one.
GDP.
Yeah.
Survey says GDP. Contestant 1, can you explain?
Of course. GDP consists of consumer spending, government spending, investment spending, and net exports. Currently, the real GDP is $23.37 trillion. That's a sign that the economy is still growing despite some global headwinds.
One more answer left. What's it going to be?
Interest rates.
Interest rates. Perfect job, economist. Would you like to explain?
Interest rates, like the federal funds rate and discount rate, play a crucial role in shaping the economy. Currently, the interest rates on reserves, the interest on reserve balances is 4.65%, and the discount rate is 4.75%.
So as you can see on the ample reserves graph, when you increase interest rates, the money supply will decrease, and because of that, there will be less incentive to buy bonds. In round 2, we'll be discussing the future forecasts. We asked economists to name factors that influence monetary policy decisions. The top 4 answers will be on the board. The question is, what factors will influence monetary policy decisions?
Inflation expectations.
Survey says inflation expectations. Inflation expectations are crucial. Contestant 3, can you explain?
Right now, the market expects inflation to be 2.26% 5 years from now, 2.32% 10 years from now, and 2.44% in 30 years.
Feds, do you want to pass or play?
Play!
All right, let's see if you can get the next answer.
Employment data.
Yeah, that's really good.
Employment data, that's correct. Back to you, Feds.
GDP growth.
Survey says GDP growth. Great job. Contestant 4, can you explain?
The Fed looks at real GDP to gauge the economy's overall health. Right now, the GDP is strong at $23.37 trillion. However, if growth slows down too much, it could signal a recession. On the flip side, if it grows too quickly, we could face an inflationary economy.
All right, great job. One more chance to sweep the board, Feds.
Global trade.
Yay!
Global trade tensions number 4 on the board. Great job. Can you explain contestant 4?
Trade tensions can impact supply chains, prices, and global economic stability. For example, currency exchange rates. Currently, $1.05 equal to €1 and to 153.74 yen to $1. This can shift during trade disputes, influencing both import and export cost.
Fantastic job, Feds. Look like this round goes to you. On to round 3. In this round, we're diving into the terminology. We asked our survey to name economic buzzwords you hear from experts. The top 4 answers will be on the board. The question is, name an economic buzzword.
Recession!
Survey says recession. Great job. Contestant 1, can you explain?
Absolutely. A recession, characterized by 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, is a dreaded economic event. While we're not in one now, it is always a concern when growth slows, especially with the yield curve currently inverting.
Also, when there is a recession, that means there's high unemployment and an expansionary monetary policy should be used. This is when the Fed buys bonds and interest rates will decrease. As a result, aggregate demand will shift to the right, which will increase the real GDP and the price level, while the unemployment rate will decrease.
Like they said, to combat a recession, you need to implement an expansionary monetary policy. So the money supply will increase and the nominal interest rates will decrease. Since interest rates and aggregate demand have an inverse relationship, aggregate demand will increase, increasing the real GDP and price level. Okay, economists, let's continue.
Yield curve.
Great job, economists. Yield curve is the second answer. Contestant 2, can you explain?
Sure. The yield curve shows the relationship between short and long-term interest rates. An inverted yield curve, when short-term rates exceed long-term rates, can signal an incoming recession.
All right, economists, let's wrap this round up.
M2.
M2 is the third and final answer. Great job. Can you explain?
Of course. M2 represents the total money supply, cash, checking deposits, and your money, like savings accounts. It includes M1 and small time deposits under 100,000. Right now, M2 is a staggering $21.39 trillion.
Great job, economists. Let's move on to round 4. All right, teams, we're moving on to the pressing issue speed round. This round is going to be a little bit different, and this is where we test how quickly you can think on your feet about the hottest monetary policy topics. The first question is, how does raising the federal funds rate affect inflation?
It gives everyone free money.
Oh, if only. That's not right. Economists, now you get a chance to steal.
Raising the federal funds rate makes borrowing more expensive, which decreases spending and investment. This reduces demand and helps lower inflation.
Correct. Raising the federal funds rate is a classic tool to combat inflation, which is currently at 2.75%. It's all about controlling demand. Right, so when you're in an inflationary period, you want to implement contractionary monetary policy. So you want to decrease the money supply, which will increase interest rates. So on the aggregate demand, aggregate supply curve, aggregate demand will decrease, which will decrease consumer spending and government spending and investment, and price level will decrease as well as real GDP. So for our next question for the pressing issue speed round, it is what happens when the unemployment rate falls below the natural rate of unemployment?
Everyone gets a job and we all live happily ever after?
No!
Good try, but not quite. Feds, you can now steal.
Falling below the NAIRU means the labor market is too tight, which can drive up wages and inflation as businesses compete for workers.
Correct. The NAIRU is estimated at 4.21%. So our current unemployment rate of 4.2% is pretty close, but if it goes too low, we might see inflationary pressure. So the third and final question in our pressing issue speed round is, how does the M2 money supply influence inflation?
More money in the system means higher inflation because people spend more.
Exactly. Great round, Feds. This shows just how much you know about pressing issues. Let's move on to our last final round. Final round. This round will be a little different. It's time to recommend monetary policy. What should we do with the federal funds rate? Raise it, lower it, or keep it steady? You have 30 seconds to discuss, teams. Economists, you go first.
Though the current economy is still relatively stable, the unemployment in New York is still slightly higher than we'd like it to be, so we would benefit from an expansionary policy.
Yeah, so as a result of an expansionary policy, the discount rate will decrease as well as the interest rate, and the federal funds rate will decrease too.
Okay, Feds, it's your turn.
We disagree. We should implement a contractionary policy because inflation expectations for the long term are creeping up and global trade tensions could push prices higher. So we want to reduce aggregate demand and inflation.
Economists, you are correct. As we mentioned before, inflation rates are going to be decreasing in the next 5 years from 2.75% to 2.26%. So as a result, we should implement an expansionary monetary policy and decrease the federal funds rate, discount rate, and interest rate. Wow, what a great game from both teams. And congrats to our overall winners of the day, the economists.